Dear guests, dear participants, I think that the time is hurrying, so we have to start another panel. Now we will focus on the issues of the famine, namely the Holodomor, its memory and forgetting, its narratives, the attempts to inscribe it in European memory and culture, and its return in the memories of Ukrainian families triggered mostly by the current geopolitical situation. In this panel we will hear 4 papers, one on-site and 3 online. And after that, I hope we will have enough time for some reflections and discussions. And I would like to ask Tatiana Perga, leading researcher at the State Institution, Institute of World History of National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, to take the floor or take the screen. Tatiana Perga is the head of Ukrainian Representative Office of European Society of Environmental History and a member of Leo Baeck Institute Jerusalem Research Group in Jewish Environmental History. She's an author of more than 140 articles, co-author of 8 books and author of 2 individual books that focused on different aspects of environmental history. Tatiana will present us an issue of Surviving the Ukrainian Famine of 1932-33, Unconventional Food Sources and Memories. Tatiana, please, the floor is yours. And we can't hear you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, everything is okay.
And do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I am very pleased to participate in this conference, and my report will be devoted to the unconventional sources of food during Holodomor. Surviving throughout periods of famine of various food crises is always a traumatic experience. Undoubtedly, Holodomor had a profound negative and enduring impact on Ukrainians. One witness said, "What was happening, it is simply impossible to convey in words. Hunger is a terrible force that caused people to lose their minds and commit horrifying acts." From medical perspective, hunger leads to stress, which alters behavior and decision-making process that affect the brain, as well the ability to assess risks. In a state of starvation-induced stress, Ukrainians in famine-affected areas were forced to resort to non-traditional food sources for survival. They had to transgress various taboos in their customary habits and behavior. This included overcoming disgust and food neophobia, the fear of consuming unfamiliar food. Based on the analysis of numerous recollections, I identify 3 categories of non-traditional food sources that were consumed during Holodomor. The first is various agriculture, household, and industrial byproducts. The second group is resources of flora and fauna, and the third source is meat of living and dead people. And in this my report, I would like to demonstrate that individuals were forced to compete for edible resources, waste, companion animals, rodents, and not only among themselves, but also with state organizations responsible for collecting of waste for the needs of Soviet industry and export. Now, I would like to describe briefly the first group of unconventional food sources. In general, it consists of carrion animals waste, frozen vegetables, animal feed, various food waste, tannery waste, leather waste, leather goods. And many of these waste were the only source of sustenance for numerous individuals in regions affected by Holodomor. This particularly relates to agricultural waste. But at the same time, many of these waste were collected for the needs of the Soviet economy and export. And furthermore, considering the shortage of raw materials for the development of the footwear and leather industries, waste picking companies began to utilize hides of various animals, dogs, cats, hamsters, and these animals were also food for people. Plans for the procurement of different waste increasing from year to year, especially during industrialization. And the bright example of this is the dynamic of collection of bones. And on this diagram, you can see that only during 3 years, starting from the beginning of collectivization or industrialization, the collection of bones increased 3 times and more. In addition, the waste, agricultural waste were also the subject of export. And on these two diagrams, you can see that they were exported even during Holodomor. Of course, the volume of this export decreased, but this export continues. And the collection of waste for the needs of Soviet industry and export further depleted the already limited food sources for those experiencing famine during Holodomor. I should like to emphasize that in the late 1920s, agricultural resources begin to diminish in result of collectivization. The directive on livestock collectivization of December 10, 1929 obliged peasants within 3 months to collectivize animals, draft animals and large cattle by 100%, pigs by 80%, sheep and goats by 60%. And this caused a sharp decline in the number of livestock as peasants began slaughtering their animals, and while horses were either slaughtering or released into fields, left into markets, and so on. And this slide demonstrates this tendency. In the first year of Holodomor in 1932, people consumed their remaining domestic livestock. And after that, they began to consume carrion. Vladimir Timofeyev. Men, when they went to work, took a sack or an axe with them. Sometimes with the horse would collapse, completely weakened from both starvation and labor. People would rush towards it shouting, Siberian, Siberian. Immediately, these men would start hacking the unfortunate horse into pieces. Krivanos Alexei, we watched and waited for the dead horses from the collective farms to be taken away for burial. We would butcher the meat, carry it home, wash it, salt it, and consume it. Shatko Piotr, the collective farm horses that died were taken to the mass burial pit. By morning, only the hooves remained. Everything else was taken by the starving people for sustenance. Message from the report of representative of the Soviet authorities. Every day, groups of peasants gather at the mass burial sites to collect and dismantle carrion. In the village of Osikino, the starving pick up and consume the bodies of deceased horses for sustenance. The reduction in domestic livestock also meant a decrease in the amount of waste available to people to consume. The second group of unconventional food sources consists of plants, companion animals, and wildlife. Eyewitness memories indicate that every plant that was available was gathered and used for sustenance. And I will not list all these plants as well as wild animals and birds. which people used to eat, and you can see them on this slide. But I would like to focus my attention on the companion animals. It is well-known fact that in the most cases, cats and dogs, they became the members of the families for people. And in these extremal conditions, people had to eat these companion animals. Some reports from memories. Koneeva Vera Petrovna. For the rest of my life, I will remember one incident. It was warm. The sun was warming, and the plump and hungry man was lying on the hill and tearing a dead cat. About dogs, Ksenia Kovalinska. Once my father brought a dog he had caught and killed. In the morning, after eating fibrous meat, my sister Masha died. Pavlo Moskalenko. Almost all cats and dogs in our village were eaten that winter. From the report of the representative of the Soviet authorities, the villages are empty. You can't even hear a dog barking because the dogs have been caught and eaten. And at the same time, the dogs, cats, and different rodents, they also became the subject of collecting, because waste collecting companies had plans which increased from year to year for collecting of these animals. And you can see some plans for collecting dogs and cats in the Kharkiv region. There is an important question. How did the Soviet authorities collect waste during Holodomor? I visited many archives in Kiev, and I could not find really documents which describe this process, because many documents of 1933, they disappeared from archives. And the terms hunger, they were not used in the documents which I found. Instead, there were used such phrases: reduction of raw materials, reduction of base of waste, a great reduction in labor resources. And of course, in 1932 and in 1933, the plans for for collecting of different waste, such as bones, leather, wool, and so on, they were not fulfilled. And only one fact that in October 1933, the plan for bone harvesting was fulfilled only on the 16%. And comparing to the September of that year, it was 40% less. And of course, it's interesting to understand how did Soviet authorities explain the impossibility to fulfill the plans. And as I said, of course, there were no any mention about the artificial hunger, and the reasons were traditional that we can find them during the Soviet times. Such reasons were the poor work of grassroots procurement organizations, and which were passed by the bonds, and their indifference to procurement, and they don't have to desired stubbornness in procurement. And one more quote: according to information from the field, there are cases when this valuable waste is not collected in the time. It rots, became unsanitary, and eventually goes to landfill. And accordingly, measures to implement plans were in traditional socialist spirit: the elimination of organization problems, improvement of leadership of responsible persons and party bodies, the socialist competitions for waste and particularly bond collections, and the increase the number of instructors to the villages that would help to collect their bonds. However, I have a question, and I could not find in archives answer to my question, whether waste collectors and instructors visited these areas. Did they afraid to visit these areas? Because as one witness, Alexei Trofimovich Dobnya said, driven to madness by hunger, parents started to eat their own children and children to eat their parents. They would catch, pass by and eat them too. I suppose that they visited these villages, but not so often as they have to do this. And the third group of unconventional food sources, meat of living and dead people. I mean cannibalism and corpse eating. Cases of cannibalism were quite widespread, but of course not all of them were fixed, and it is impossible to figure the real number of cases of cannibalism. I would like to quote two documents. One is Memory of Anastasia Duke. My aunt Motya used to treat me to pies made from the body of my girlfriends. Our neighbors had 5 children. When everything was taken away and the neighbors had no cause, 4 children died. After putting the corpses in their cellar, the father and mother took the meat from their dead children, fried it, ate it themselves, and fed it to their last son. When I saw this, I ran home and screamed, "Oh, mommy, don't eat meat from us." My friend Aunt Motya gave me some fried meat, but I didn't want it. And another quote is, this is the quote from the special message from Yelnitskaya MTS from Odessa region to the deputy chairman of OGPU Yagoda about cases of cannibalism, May 27, 1933. On the afternoon of May 23, it became known that in the collective farm named after Stalin, a 10-year-old schoolgirl had disappeared. In the evening of the same day, a 6-year-old girl was found dead in the apartment of Citizen A, from which Citizen A prepared food for herself. During the preliminary interrogation, the accused stated that she, together with a citizen of the same village with whom she lived, personally killed 4 children from 6 to 10 years of age during 2 weeks. She invited these children to her apartment during the day, directly using her own daughter. And one more quote from the report of GPU on the food difficulties on Ukrainian SSR of March 12, 1933. According to data received in February-March, there were 28 cases of cannibalism. The majority of them took place in the third decade of February and early March. 90 of 28 cases of cannibalism occurred in Kiev region. In February, there were also 13 cases of corpse eating. And there are some my conclusions. The policy of the Soviet government undermined the base of additional sources of food for people in the territories affected by Holodomor. The study of Holodomor shows that in extreme life situations, the scope of perception of edible things is significantly expanded and people's animal instinct is obviously activated. And many Ukrainians, in order to survive, were forced to make difficult physical and moral choices, to step over various taboos, including in matters of food. Do we have the right to condemn them? And how would we behave if we were in the same situation? Thank you very much.
Tatiana, thank you very much for your presentation and for perfect time schedule and discipline. And now I would like to invite Wiktoria Kudela-Świątek, an assistant professor, historian, and East Slavic philologist at the Institute of History and Archival Studies at the Pedagogical University of Krakow. Her academic interests focus on interdisciplinary critical thinking and writing about the past, especially memory studies, oral history, and visual history. She was a research fellow at the Holodomor Research and Educational Consortium, the Center of Urban History in Lviv, and the Herman Institute at the Columbia University in New York. She's the author of 5 books, to mention the last one, Eternal Memory, The Monuments and Memorials of the Holodomor. Today, the professor will present the issues of feminization of the Ukrainian famine in the Holodomor culture of memory. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I try sharing my screen. And well, I hope you see my presentation here. Okay. Thank you very much for opportunity to present my paper today. It's my honor and it's my pleasure to be a part of this conference, and I really regret for that I couldn't be in person in Warsaw, but I try to do my best to present my paper just now. The issue which I reflect today is about the uniqueness of the Holodomor feminization in Holodomor culture of memory. Speaking about the Holodomor memory, the problem of uniqueness is present at the level of the name, chronological framework, and defining the perpetrators. However, these are processes that are present in the commemoration in the Irish famine and the Bengal famine also, and the whole range of traumatic experiences. It's extremely difficult to commemorate the famine as a disaster because it's a history of national humiliation, an embarrassing proof of economic helplessness. If we talk about famine in the Ukrainian culture of memory, even the post-war famines in 1922 and 1946 were perceived as intentional on the part of the central government, also as a great famine. But the great famine in Ukraine was assessed as artificial and planned man-made nature. In the 1930s, it was referred to as the taming of Ukrainians, the deliberate extermination of thousands of Ukrainians many years before Lemkin's definition of genocide. That is why from the beginning, the victims were honored as fallen, as martyrs for the freedom of Ukraine, including in sacred categories. The Great Famine is the foundation of Ukrainian identity. It's a national temple, and the critical perspective of this topic is often assessed in moral and nationalistic terms and sees it as a sacrilegious act. Certainly, many of those present at the conference are familiar with discussions about the number of victims of famine, in which the opposing sides do not differ in the method of working with data, but in loyalty to the Ukrainian nation. This is a difficult topic, especially in the face of a war caused by the same aggressor as 19 years earlier. The memory of Great Famine has its geographical variations, as in the case of the Irish famine. In the case of the Ukrainian famine, first outside the Soviet Union, in diaspora, and then an independent Ukraine state. However, we are not talking about continuity of process or similarity here, but I choose 3 of images which are the similar for the cultures of memory. Margaret Kahaler proposed the term feminization of famine in relation to the memory of the Irish famine and the Bengal famine. I don't feel able to refer to literature and the analysis of literature images here. I think this topic is waiting for its own author. Today I will speak more about visual narratives. As Kahaler, I've called the feminization of famine is one of the most significant and obvious patterns of representation in famine texts. In example, when writers seek to depict the famine in individual terms, as well as artists in visual art, they employ images of women, most frequently images of mother and child, to convey the extent of the catastrophe and the challenges posed to human relations. Those recurring figures of famine text, past and present, include the mother unable to feed her children, suckling at the breast of the dead mother, a woman unable to bury her child, a mother snatching food from her child, or her heroic opposite, a woman sacrificing all order to feed her children. In the case of the Holodomor, images of women were present from the very beginning. And there were 3 of them in the Ukrainian diaspora. The image that opens the portraits of women's representation of the Holodomor is a photo taken by Alexander Wennerberger on the streets of Kharkov. The second one is Ulas Samchuk poem Maria, which was written in 1934. Ulas Samchuk, a Ukrainian emigre writer, writes a novel about a woman who experiences famine along with her entire family. One of the shocking scenes for me as a teenager was the description of her daughter-in-law named Hope, Nadia, killing her child. The third is painting, the year 1933, painted by another immigrant artist in Buenos Aires, Victor Cymbal. And the last 2 visualities were additionally related to Ukrainian Orthodoxy in the US and Canada since 1950s at the Council in New York, separated from Moscow. Expressing trauma or traumatic memories associated with a particular experience is always challenging. Visual representation of trauma are not usually created to emerge as an intellectual and therefore creative attempt to overcome trauma and conduct a dialogue with oneself and one's contemporaries about lived traumatic experiences. An important example is Griselda Pollack's theoretical approach to trauma concerning the maternal centers on mothers and motherhood images as visual tropes of trauma created by artists of both genders. According to her, trauma is a specifically feminine association. The maternal feminine is the unthinkable sphere, and motherhood are connected. Is connected with birth and death. It must be noted that in the case of visual representation of the Holodomor, the image of motherhood develops a different direction. The first are images of motherhood, which are explained through the maternal concept as a manifestation of fragility and uncertainty in the face of the indefinite future. But Oksana Keys notes that in traditional Ukrainian culture, the image of the mother occupies the highest position in the hierarchy of social values. Also, in diaspora, in the Little Ukrainian Encyclopedia published in the mid-1950s, Professor Yevhen Onatsky stressed that the cult of the mother found in reflection in folk culture as evidenced by many rites in which the mother figure plays the key role. At the same time, to Ukrainians, the image of the Mother of God is the embodiment of ideal motherhood. She also signifies homeland, which has been clearly showcased in the literary heritage of the Ukrainian nation. Indeed, visual representation of the Holodomor using the image of the mother remains within the sphere of traditional nation values and folk tradition. At the same time, these images are very detached from how women, including mothers, coped during the Holodomor. This is sublimated, safe image that does not reveal day-to-day life's drama making to ideal for mass culture. On one level, we are dealing with the fact that the image of suffering most often invoked in motherhood and the image of a woman. And the other level, in Ukrainian culture, the mother of God is traditionally perceived as the ideal mother, the mother of the home, motherland. This point is also crucial when considering the viewer's ability to recognize the symbolism of a new event in the public sphere. while aesthetically beautiful images can encourage the viewer to reflect on the nation past, or at least make them pause for a moment in the shadow of such a monument. In the early 1990s, the creators of monumental architecture, for example, faced the difficult task of creating visual culture for Holodomor. It was up to those first artists to decide whether to produce a new symbolic approach or follow the already existing and proven ones. In other words, the first symbolic approach to the Holodomor had to be conveyed through symbolic scenes understandable to the viewer brought up in the Soviet monumental art tradition, while emphasizing the fault of the previous system, residing in the fact that the Holodomor took place at all. In the Soviet monumental tradition, it was part of the convention to allude to trauma through the representation of the motherhood as the mother and the traumatic experience of war as her suffering. In many cases, images of the Holodomor trauma generalized mothers referring to the Virgin Mary as Theotokos in 1990s. As a newly independent state, from the early 1990s, Ukraine was engaged in the dynamic nation-building process, reinterpreted and rediscovered its historical memory and identity. As part of the political project, the Ukrainian state actively promoted a new interpretation of the Ukrainian myth of Beregynia. Beregynia in post-communist Ukraine public space was presented as a deep-rooted pagan goddess of the domestic hers who symbolized the mother protector of her children, home and nation. The Beregynia cult links a patriarchal post-Soviet mother cult with a transnational, for example, starting from a national cult of Virgin Mary, which simultaneously incorporates Christian and general Eastern Slavic as well as Soviet elements, as you remember, motherhood statue in Kyiv. The image of Beregynia is also infused with Christian motifs, as Ukraine experiences a large-scale revitalization of Christianity. A religious revival and rewriting of Ukrainian history are part of the search for Ukrainian roots that would help the new territorial state create a shared sense of identity. By the 1990s, the increasing influence of Orthodoxy and the general rise of mysticism in post-Soviet countries were primarily encouraged by the Moscow Patriarchy dominance in the post-Soviet Ukraine. Yet Virgin Mary and her icons were inseparable from Orthodox historical memory and collective hope during time of national crisis. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the economic crisis only strengthened the church influence, becoming a new ideological output for many. In this bottomless social and political crisis, Mary's cult was stimulated by collective memory. The religious images reinterpreted in this new social cultural environment became a part of the new visual vernacular entitled to express anxieties, traumas, and uncertainty, and on another hand, to disrupt Soviet aesthetics and artistic canons. The splendid statue of some Orthodox Beregynia Oranta towered over the main square of Kyiv, Maidan Nezalezhnosti. This photo is before the full-scale aggression. The splendid statue of some Orthodox Beregynia Oranta towering of the main square of Kyiv, Maidan Nezalezhnosti, is a strong statement about the intended role of women in the post-Soviet Ukraine society. The Oranta mean prayer woman. Another name is the Great Panagia, as a figure with hands raised in prayer, which symbolize rhythm soul in Orthodox iconography. The style is one of the oldest. The first Christians painted in the catacombs. What's more, this image is associated with St. Sophia Orthodox Church situated in Kyiv, a symbol of the centuries-old tradition of the Ukrainian state. The myth of Beregynia is much more implemented in other iconographic image of the Mother of God, another canonical embodiment, the Pokrova, Saint Mary, the protectress of the Virgin of Mercy, shows the Virgin Mary covering God's people in the voile. Therefore, in this type of iconography, we find examples where the Virgin holds a voile or holds an open maphoria over people, reduced figures at her feet. We can also see Mary in the position of Oranta, and angels have the voile over her head. This is an image deeply rooted in Ukrainian culture. It's connected with the iconography of the period of Kazakhstan, and notably that 14th of October, when the Orthodox Church celebrates Saint Mary the Protectress, it is also the official Defender of Ukrainian Day since 2015. However, when we talk about commemorating the Holodomor in public space, the image of Berezina is explored indirectly. Holodomor iconography uses universal Christian symbols but remains deeply rooted in the Orthodox Church. From the very beginning, the exploration of Marian iconography is foreground is in the foreground. The canonical images of the Mother of God were used here. They already mentioned the Oranta and the Pokrova. It takes place in public space, or preferably in the statements of activists related to the Holodomor's commemoration on the occasion of the 60th anniversary. Moreover, the religious connection of the first anniversary of this event is independent Ukraine were reflected in the Holodomor monument in Kyiv. For instance, in one of her press statements in 1993, Lydia Kovalenko-Maryak, president of the Association of Holodomor Researchers, emphasized that the religious element is symbolically very important in these commemorations. She also held the position that the most significant number of people died on the period from autumn 1932 to spring 1933. But she measures this time with important Orthodox holidays because she talks about the period between Pokrova 1932 and Tritya, White Sunday, 1933. Therefore, one of the components of the state celebration of the 60th anniversary of the Holodomor in Kyiv were Panachidas, Orthodox solemn liturgical service, throughout 1993. Here again, Kovalenko-Maryak counts the time according to the liturgical calendar to tell us about the period between the Pokrov, 1992, from 1992 to 1993. The first monument, which was built by the Association of Holodomor Researchers commemorating the victims of the Holodomor, was unveiled in Kyiv in 1993, as Margaret told us in her presentation. It's located near St. Michael's Orthodox Church. The memorial in Kyiv has the shape of a square, stalemate of the Great Pyramid, as all of you know. It is interesting to note that the image of the Mother of God did not appear in the Holodomor places of memory created on the initiative of the Ukrainian diaspora in the time of the Orange Revolution. Only during President Yushchenko terms 2005, from 2005 to 2010, would the ties between the Ukrainian diaspora's remembrance policy and that of the independent Ukraine state be additionally strengthened due to the deep respect and the president had for the implementation of the symbolic policy by the Ukrainian diaspora. For the first time, monuments using Marian iconography were created in countries inhabited by the Ukrainian diaspora. However, these were not new monuments, but copies of the aforementioned Kyiv monuments. Since the Orange Revolution, Marian images referring to Orthodox iconography no longer resonate in the social space and have been gradually replaced by the other religious symbols, crosses, angels, and candles. Though the sacred character of remembering the event does not change, but the symbolic representation has transformed, becoming increasingly conventionalized with recognizable repeating sets of symbol scenes. During this period, the sacred dimension of the memory of the Holodomor was attained through the sacralization of the Marian image, and further imbuing it with a secular meaning, a woman, mother, and a girl, potentially a future mother. And the use of a candle as a universal symbol of remembering that both of the symbolic representation appear in the Holodomor Memorial in Kyiv, the Candle of Memory, unveiled in 2008 as initiative of the then president. Since President Yanukovych built his policy of the negation of these predecessors and discredited his undertakings in the context of commemoration, in his term, that image had to be decentralized. At that time, visual representation remained relatively conventional in form. However, the subject of Holodomor memory returns to the sacrality only after the Revolution of Dignity. In the background of the 1993 Holodomor monument, as you can see in the slide, in Kiev and on the Church of St. Michael's walls, where is a socially organized memorial site called Kivli 100 Nebesna Sotnia. Visiting there now, one gets the impression that it's a memorial site for the victims of both events. In social rituals, the center of gravity has shifted from national sacrifice to individual sacrifice, remembered as martyrs, innocently martyred, saint martyrs. In 2020, a series about the Cossack family was shown on Ukrainian television. It was a family saga originally filmed by in Russian language, but redubbing in 2022, in which in the contemporary version we encountered famous images from Ulas Samchuk novella Maria. The main character is Christina, and she is a survivor of the Holodomor along with her two sons. The story of this family is also told up to the time of the Revolution of Dignity. One evening, Christina's very old sons light a candle in the window at 4 p.m. Kiev time. But they also do it to remember the heroism of their mother, thanks to whose courage they survived the famine. However, since 2014, the Holodomor has been gradually transformed into a symbol of steadfastness. Survivors of the Holodomor are also called steadfast. But what does it mean for us? Is it the end of the feminization of the Holodomor in Holodomor culture of memory? I think that this feminization is, I think if feminization is synonymous with victimization, then probably so, although that's probably a risky statement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation and also for schedule and time discipline. So we are moving fast, but in time. The third presentation will be delivered by Elżbieta Ostrowska, PhD at the Department of Film and Audiovisual Media at the University of Łódź. Her publications include the cinematic bodies of Eastern Europe and Russia, Women in Polish Cinema, the cinema of Roman Polanski, Dark Spaces of the World, the cinema of Andrzej Wajda, The Art of Irony and Defiance, and Gender in Film and the Media, East-West Dialogues. Her articles have appeared in Slavic Review, Studies in European Cinema, Studies in Eastern European Cinema, as well as Holocaust and Genocide Studies. In a minute, we will hear a presentation of Transnational Perspective on Holodomor in Agnieszka Holland's Mr. Jones.
Thank you very much. No, I just cannot decide whether I shall stay here or to go there. As it is. Oh, okay. I will stay. Okay. Am I audible? Okay. Excellent. So, thank you very much for your generous, and I would say too generous introduction, because some of these books are just editorials, right? So I just would like you to know that some of them are just edited or co-edited by me. Now, hello to everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I'm really extremely happy to see you all here. And I would like to thank all of the speakers who delivered lectures before me, because, well, actually I feel very fortunate to have my paper being delivered after your papers, because they provide just a wonderful context for my paper, which is very modest, I would say, in scale, because it's just a case study. So I think that it fits really nicely within this larger context provided by Margaret, Tatiana, and Victoria. So the title of it is Transnational Perspective on the Holodomor in Agnieszka Holland's Mr. Jones. And as you can see, actually, this paper is a part of a larger project that is focused on Agnieszka Holland. And by the way, Marta Karkowska yesterday was talking about bright and dark sides of the COVID memories. Actually, I wrote the application for this research project during the first lockdown. So I would say that I have a kind of bright memory of it. But anyway, just getting back to the topic of my paper. So. I suppose that for all of you who are from Poland, the name of Agnieszka Holland is very familiar and I would say almost infamous because of what was happening around her quite recently when her film Green Border was released. And actually this hype, this vehement attack on her happened before all of these right-wing politicians saw the film. And this particular event is nothing exceptional in Agnieszka Holland's artistic biography because actually a kind of political stir up around her films occurred quite frequently. And, okay, no, how, this? Okay, so that's how we can move towards Mr. Jones. In 2021, a group of around 30 young men disrupted the screening of Mr. Jones organized by Polish Cultural Institute at the Office of Memorial, the oldest Russian NGO organization. The young men in Moscow protested the screening of Mr. Jones to manifest their disagreement with the negative representation of the Soviet regime in the 30s and its responsibility for the Holodomor. This protest can also be seen in the context of the fact that Russia, unlike many other countries, did not recognize the Holodomor as genocide. Before no, that's the end of my presentation. No. Oh, yes, okay. That was the same graphic design, and okay, yeah, so before, I'm sorry, before I discuss the film's politics of representation, because actually that would be the main focus of my paper. I will be analyzing the politics of representation. And I just need to make this disclaimer right away that I'm not that much interested in whether this film is faithful to historical facts. Because, well, that's not the most productive strategy. I'm more interested in a kind of ideological work that is being performed by the film as I will be analyzing it. But anyway, before I discuss the film's politics of representation, I will briefly present its content to contextualize the further argument. The eponymous character of Gareth Jones, actually he's been mentioned today as well as his opponent Walter Duranty, was a Welsh journalist who traveled 3 times to the Soviet Union in the early 30s and reported to the Western world the Holodomor. Jones's reports were denounced by the American journalist Walter Duranty in the New York Times, which significantly affected the Welshman's credibility. In 1935, Jones died in Mongolia, most likely murdered by the Soviet Secret Service and KGB. And thus, he did not witness the truth about Stalin's atrocities being revealed. Yeah. Although the historical figure of Gareth Jones is relatively well known, which is mostly due to several books documenting his efforts to reveal and disseminate the truth of the Holodomor to the Western world. It was Agnieszka Holland's movie Mr. Jones made in 2019 that made him known to the larger sectors of Western society. In this paper, I will discuss the protagonist of Mr. Jones as a cross-border hero in two ways. He travels from west to east, not only geographically, but also mentally, when he disengages from the Western politics of appeasement towards Soviet power and empathetically acknowledges the Soviet atrocities committed on the Ukrainians. The character of Gareth Jones serves as a mediator between the represented people of Ukraine and the viewers. In what will follow, I will demonstrate how the film transmits Western perspective on the Ukrainian history. So actually, I'm just developing on your ideas, Margaret. So that's the example, a case study for this third strategy, which is about fragmentation and mediation. And in what will follow, I will try to reveal this ideological message that is being inscribed into this specific strategy. On the one hand, Holland incorporates the experience of the Holodomor to the European collective memory. But at the same time, the film exoticizes it and thus perpetuates the myth of the otherness of Eastern Europe. I will argue that Mr. Jones presents the Holodomor from the perspective of the Western center rather than the Eastern periphery. And thus, I will propose to consider it as manufacturing what I call a post-communist exotic, which term I will explain in due course. The Western perspective in Holland's film is established on both the narrative and visual level. First and foremost, the main dramatic conflict in Mr. Jones occurs between two Western men. So this is just something that actually dominates the narrative. So that speaks for itself, right? That something that is happening between these two Westerners is the most important and probably something the Western viewer can identify with. Now I need to find it. Gareth Jones and Walter Duranty, who respectively represent moralism and pragmatism as two opposing attitudes towards the Soviet politics implemented in Ukraine. The characters of the Soviets are one-dimensional incarnations of pure evil representing totalitarian regime that leaves no space for a kind of debate occurring between Jones and Duranty. Finally, the Ukrainians are presented as passive victims of the Holodomor who are empathetically observed by Jones while being deprived of any narrative agency. The viewers see them exclusively through the Western gaze as embodied by Jones. Who always, tak? Naprawdę? Who always occupies the central position within the frame. That's really very important because obviously our perception is being shaped by this principle of Renaissance perspective, and everything that is just in the middle is being also semantically privileged, right? And that's exactly what is happening in this film. Furthermore, the Western perspective is established by means of the narrative frame that shows George Orwell writing his famous novel, The Animal Farm, that was allegedly inspired by Gareth Jones' reports on the situation in the Soviet Union and the famine in Ukraine. Thus, a universal political parable that is well familiar to the Western audience, provides a lens through which they will watch the film depicting a particular and unique historical experience of the Holodomor. Later, the film employs various representational strategies to establish Western perspective as a filter through which the viewer will look at the Holodomor. First and foremost, Mr. Jones establishes a distinct visual differences between the West and the East. The action of the film begins in Great Britain, focusing on Gareth Jones' relationship with David Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister during the First World War. For this part of the film, Holland uses realistic mise-en-scène. So as you can see, it's almost transparent kind of representational strategy. So everything is clear and everything is, let's say, normal, right? And then, yeah, and there is a scene in Lloyd's cabinet, and you have this soft lighting, these nice colors, and obviously that produces this effect of coziness, right? You just feel at home. So you feel at home in the West, right? And then we have this rather radical change of the perspective. Okay, so specifically, we can go, yeah. Specifically, the color palette visibly darkens, as does lighting. In effect, depicted reality appears as opaque and hardly penetrable, signifying Jones's confusion and incomprehension of the world of the Soviet totalitarian regime. Now, there is quite controversial episode in this film of an orgy, as it is organized by Walter Duranty. And in this one, you can see this kind of grotesque and surreal imagery. And you have this very warm lighting. You have this obviously questionable, sorry, I've just noticed that I'm pretty short of time. Organized who in his articles praised Joseph Stalin's economic success, employs a grotesque style including non-realistic acting and costumes, as well as expressive colors and lighting to signify moral corruption of the Westerners who collaborated with the Soviet regime. Finally, when Jones embarks on his solitary and illegal journey across Ukraine, the visual scheme changes once again to show the country ravaged by the political terror and famine. Desolate Desolate landscape conveys loneliness and vulnerability. Its whitewashed colors transform it into a wasteland drained of any form of life. The interiors of country cottages are darkish and underlit that evoke coldness and despair. The people, as Jones sees them, appear as still as if being frozen, while the expressionless faces convey a catatonic-like state. The aesthetic code employed in Mr. Jones parallels the 18th century Western travelers' description of the other Europe as described by Larry Wolff in his seminal book, Inventing Eastern Europe. The scene of Jones traveling across Ukraine is disconcertingly similar to this description in that it conveys the effect of alienation. In addition, the Welshman observes it from behind the train's window that serves as a safe curtain separating him from the cold and lifeless world of Ukrainian nature. Jones observes the country devastated and tormented by famine and gradually gets closer to its inhabitants, whose existence is reduced to the Agamben's bare life. The lowest point is the scene of the involuntary cannibalism Jones commits when he joins a bunch of orphan children who have been nourishing themselves with chunks cut from the siblings who died from the cold and malnutrition. Can we just, yeah. One more? One more. Okay, thank you. What is the most important here is that the protagonist, after realizing what he has done, involuntarily retches and expels the object from his body, while the children remain catatonically stoic, as if incapable of the instinctual reaction to revulsion. This episode was vehemently protested by the family of the late journalist. Cases of cannibalism during the Holodomor did occur, as reported by many historians, such as, for example, Timothy Snyder, who emphasized that cannibalism was never justified by Ukrainian people, and as a shameful episode in their history, it was a cultural taboo. Actually, it wasn't a completely cultural taboo, and now I don't have time, but in this film, you have a pretty a graphic depiction of cannibalism. But what is important is that the Ukrainian people presents this moral rage towards what is happening. Whereas in Mr. Jones, they are being presented just as passive victims. And that's the important and really basic difference. Now, I believe that I just need to jump to the conclusion. So there is a couple of pictures. Okay. So now, my argument is due to the fact that Holland's film consistently employs the Western perspective that is substantiated by the Western gaze. I propose to see the film as producing the effect of the post-communist exotic. I adapted from Graham Hagan's concept of the post-colonial exotic that, as he explains, refers to potential commodification of cultural difference of post-colonial countries. Likewise, post-communist exotic also, as I propose, refers to contradictory ideological forces. On the one hand, it is potentially a critical tool for an examination of communist history, while on the other hand, it is also being embedded in the logic of late capitalism. Therefore, a critical representational strategy employed in Mr. Jones for depicting the Holodomor aimed at integrating of the experience in European history while also suggesting the West implication in it, eventually manufactures a saleable product for the Western gaze. No, I still have 1 minute. Okay, so notwithstanding the significance of Mr. Jones as a film documenting the historical experience of the Holodomor, I argue it perpetuates the myth of the otherness of Eastern Europe. It simultaneously represents the genocide of Ukrainian people as an integral part of European history, while also depicting it as substantially different from the Western experience. The film portrays the Holodomor from the perspective of the Western center rather than the Eastern periphery, and thus, as I have demonstrated, it manufactures what I call the post-communist exotic. For it involves contradictory impulses of critical interrogation of the communist past and its repercussions in the present, as well as the commodification of these realities and transforming them into this commodified product, which testifies to the assimilation of the Western gaze and its attendant ideological framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your deep insights. And the last presentation in this panel will be given by Professor Amber Brittain-Hale, co-founder of Brain States. With a PhD in global leadership and change from Pepperdine University, she brings a deep understanding of leadership dynamics in a global context. Amber's expertise extends to analyzing trends, identifying patterns, and providing actionable insights to decision makers using cutting-edge technology. And today, Professor will share her observations on the Holodomor and the emergence of contemporary narratives, investigating Russian colonialism and historical acknowledgements. Professor, please.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It is my great joy to be here. Let me share my slides. All right. Is everyone able to see me or see my slides? I hope so. Let me first say that today is Thanksgiving in the United States, which commemorates the Pilgrims' journey to the Americas and their first harvest of significance. This is a day of eating and food-related gratitude for what we have in the United States. So it is ironic to be presenting on a man-made famine in Ukraine on the same day. So again, thank you so much for having me. What started my research into this area was my exploration of diplomacy, digital diplomacy, and narratives in online social networks. When Russia invaded Ukraine, there began to be an emerging narrative that linked generational traumas to the current war. Individuals in online social networks began sharing their historical experiences that they heard through family narrative. So even though Holodomor was almost 100 years ago, the subsequent generations of either survivors or children at that time, this has begun to expand in a digital sense. So my study delves into the Holodomor, as we've known through these previous distinguished discussions, a man-made famine orchestrated in the 1930s in Ukraine under Soviet rule. I looked at its intricate ties to Russian colonialism, and I anchored it on the thesis that intergenerational narratives and family genealogies are pivotal in preserving Ukrainian history and resilience. And my research emphasizes the significance of these narratives in the face of Russian colonialism, and its further relevance is highlighted by the Russo-Ukrainian War. Central to this examination is the role of Western denial and eventual acknowledgement of the Holodomor. In the past few years, we've seen more countries recognize the Holodomor as a genocide. That Western denialism, let's link that back to Walter Durante, who was mentioned in the previous presentation. As a reporter for the New York Times who did travel to the Soviet Union, his obfuscation and deliberate denial and disguising of the famine resulted in him winning a Pulitzer Prize for the New York Times, which they have refused to relinquish. They've been called upon many times to give it up for this false and damaging narrative that they perpetuated on the pages of their newspaper, and they refused. This component adds to this complex and fraught digital landscape where individuals who look at historical documents, the newspaper of record, she's called the Gray Lady. The New York Times is called the Gray Lady. This is the newspaper of record in the United States and has the widest global distribution of any paper. For them to refuse to back away from their narrative, their reporter, Walter Durante, makes this environment complex. So looking at how the war has catalyzed a shift in perception and influenced contemporary discourse factors into my paper. The legacy of the Holodomor in the collective Ukrainian memory highlights significant role of these intergenerational narratives and family genealogies. Again, Holodomor survivors and first generation descendants are not necessarily digital. It is a rarity. However, subsequent generations do share under hashtags such as Russian colonialism or hashtag Russia with 2 Z's. There's other ways to share these memories, again, under Holodomor references and linking them to also the Holocaust and other incursions into Ukraine, but emphasizing the Ukrainian spirit. One thing I would like to point out was one of the earlier presentations mentioned a significant role of animals and not any dogs barking or being perceived. In my research, looking at infopolitik and the way that state narratives are presented by Ukraine in their messaging, the role of animals and children is significant. It's used by the Ministry of Defense. It's used by other state institutions. There's often iconography such as a soldier holding a cat or rescuing a badger. Many of the deployed soldiers at the front are featured with an animal. This is a persistent theme, humanizing Ukrainians and their great care for their society, up to and including every kitten that was rescued after the dam was blown. It is important to feature this aspect. Much of this comes from a time when there were no pets, there were no animals, there was no sustenance. But these themes, if you would find, are a golden thread that connect the Holodomor to our present time. These ongoing challenges posed by Russian colonialism, in particular this war. But these narratives online challenge that long-standing Western denialism and the famine's intentional design. By expanding our understanding of the Holodomor within the broader framework of colonialism, the research showed the dynamics of historical recognition shaped by crisis. In particular, it highlighted the role of online social networks as pivotal platforms for disseminating and reinforcing narratives that link the Holodomor to Soviet policies and Russian colonization efforts. The implications of my study extended beyond the specific event and offered insights into the mechanisms of historical denial, the power of collective memory, and the transformative potential of crisis in narrative reshaping. We have already covered that it is man-made, contemporary discourse. So intergenerational narratives have played a crucial role in understanding resilience and shedding light on the Holodomor and its ties to Russian colonialism. Increasing social understanding and Western recognition of this catastrophic event is important. It's an important second and third tier event stemming from Soviet policies and Russian colonialism, and it is an imperative of confronting the denialism and acknowledging the pervasive influence of colonialism in the historical context. Moreover, the significance of online social platforms promote alternative narratives that challenge historical denials and foster a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding of the Holodomor as seen through the lens of Ukrainian experiences and perspectives. I asked in my study how the intergenerational narratives have contributed to the preservation and transmission of collective memory about the Holodomor among Ukrainian communities, and in what ways have these narratives shaped the understanding and resilience against the backdrop of Russian colonialism. You'll see on the screen this image. This is from a video game that is being developed by a Ukrainian company. It is to share the experience of the Holodomor and have a immersive learning experience about this crisis, this tragedy. It's being developed as an educational tool for children to be utilized to access these generational narratives and preserve Ukrainian history and resilience. And again, highlight that transformative experience, taking the Eastern and the Western and bridging the difference between those two perspectives. So the first question I already read. The other one was investigating how the recent war has affected the recollection and communication of Holodomor experiences within Ukrainian families and its impact of the perception of the Holodomor as part of Russian colonial policy in contemporary Ukrainian society. What I've discovered in online social networks and in the digital sphere, again, is this linkage of all Russian aggression and Russian colonial aspects to historical episodes, including the Holodomor and the post-World War II to liberation epic of time. So illustrating that personal stories and accounts are passed down through generations provide a visceral understanding of the Holodomor's toll on Ukrainian families. Contrasting with the often impersonal historical data, these stories recount experiences of hunger, loss, and survival and offer a human dimension to the tragedy. By sharing these personal stories, Ukrainians challenge the legacy of Russian colonialism and its impact on historical truth, promoting a more accurate representation of their past. Looking at digital platforms, they amplify Ukrainian voices. Social media and online forums have become crucial for disseminating and preserving these intergenerational narratives. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, as well as dedicated blogs, allow for a global sharing of personal stories, connecting the Ukrainian diaspora and engaging international audiences, thus broadening the understanding of the Holodomor beyond Ukraine. So this study reveals that there's an enduring legacy of the Holodomor in Ukrainian collective memory, and it's significantly shaped by these narratives and connecting family genealogies. This is a preservation of history, which may ordinarily be lost, but as traditionally stories were told orally, passed down from parent to child and so forth, these same mechanisms are being utilized in the online space in a digital way, connecting history and narratives of resilience in Ukraine to the contemporary case study of resisting the full-scale Russian invasion. This is what I had to share with you today. I really appreciate your time. I was grouped into a very esteemed collective of researchers, and I appreciate the synchronicity between our topics. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. And we had a lot of additional time. So before we sum up this panel, I would like to invite you and to encourage you to ask some questions or say some reflections.
All right, Ms. Ostrovka, I was fascinated by your lecture and the tension that you pointed out in, on the one hand, the importance of globalizing memories in this cross-national way. On the other hand, the risk of exoticizing, which seems to be almost inherent to this process. So my question is, do you envision a way in which we can actually sort of globalize memories that do not fall into that pitfall of exoticizing? What would that ideally look like? Or maybe you have examples of where that actually does work.
Okay. Thank you so much for this question, because actually we are asking about something I wanted to develop on more, but obviously I was short of time. And okay, how to start? Yes, I do believe that it is possible just to make these two things compatible. And I think that this concept that was earlier mentioned by Margaret of multi-directional memory is something that helps to solve the dilemma, representational dilemma. And actually it is really very interesting and puzzling for me in a way, because when I was analyzing earlier films by Agnieszka Holland that are dealing with the experience of the Holocaust, I was exactly arguing for her using, or, well, not exactly using the concept of multi-directional memory, but producing or making films that are conveying this kind of perspective. In Mr. Jones, it has evaporated. And there was also another concept also by Michael Rothberg and also mentioned by Margaret today of this implicated subject. And actually in Agnieszka Holland's movies on the Holocaust, like Europa Europa, or In Darkness, or the Angry Harvest, all of them were representing this kind of characters that could be identified as implicated subjects. And whereas in Mr. Jones, right, we do not have anything like this. And there is another thing that should be mentioned, that in Mr. Jones, Agnieszka Holland uses this genre of biopic. And this is a kind of very conservative genre per se, and it's quite often criticized as usually being about great white men doing great things. And Mr. Jones is, in a way, incarnation of this kind of character. And on top of it, he is also embodying this very familiar and cherished figure of a male martyr because of his death. So I would say that quite surprisingly for Holland, who in her work always would opt for this, let's say, polyphonic discourse, to use this concept by Bakhtin. In Mr. Jones, she just decided to go for something like monophonic discourse and also replicating, let's say, this representational regime introduced by the politics and ideological system of the Cold War. Sorry, I've been talking a lot, but I hope that I addressed. Okay, thank you.
Hello. So the following question, I would also coming back on this movie. What was interesting with Mr. Jones is that recently there were these accusations of Holland being some communist agents, which is kind of ironic considering she did this movie. So the question is, did people thought about that when they, like, was Mr. Jones brought back in the debate, or is it giving to this polemic too much intellectual credit?
I'm not sure. Could you please make it a little bit more? Could you please repeat? I'm not sure whether I.
Okay. I've seen Mr. Jones, and I found kinda ironic that when Hollande made Zhelana Granica, people accused her of being pro-Russian, considering she had made this movie. So I was wondering if it was brought into the debate, or is it giving too much intellectual credit to this polemic?
Well, I think that there is no situation we can say that there is too much of intellectual work being put into something. So I will just make this very general, but if you would like it to be more specific, please just develop on it.
Okay, so you did not understand my question?
sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No. Feministą? No, I'm not. Okay, Dorota has something to say. Perhaps you could just...
Ja nie mam pojęcia, bo nie śledziłam tego, ale rozumiem, że pytanie jest o to. Sorry, I'm just trying.
Yeah, it was the sense of my question because when they did this accusation that she was supposedly pro-Russian because she made that movie, and I don't say that the accusations are justified. It's the opposite. Like I saw the movie and the Belarusians got awards. But for instance, they
Right.
they even tried to say that her movie about Popieruszko's murder was pro-Soviet, which is just defamation. But were they discourse trying to defame Mr. Jones in the campaign against Agnieszka Holland, because it's a recent movie and it's in no way pro-Russian? And this is why I said, is it too much intellectual credit? Because there is not much effort put into this defamation campaign.
No, okay. Thank you so much for developing on it, because now and obviously Dorota has helped immensely in just sorting it out. Actually, Mr. Jones was not directly used in this campaign, right? The current campaign. But the situation is that Holland has been for a long time an enemy number one. So the right-wing politicians, they are just ready to attack her for any reason. And this concept of these right-wing politicians, they are using this argument that she is pro-Russian as easily as they are using this argument that the democratic opposition that hopefully will form our government in a while is pro-German. So that's the way in which they manipulate with the film, using it in a current political debate the way that is convenient for them. But actually there were no specific and direct references to Mr. Jones. Actually, I think that honestly, this film has not been that discussed in the Polish media, and actually I'm quite surprised that nowadays with this situation of the war in Ukraine, it has not returned. But I think that for some political options, it is not inconvenient, right, to return to this film that obviously is very pro-Ukrainian, while at the same time doing this kind of ideological work as I have demonstrated.
Okay. Yeah, it's not her first movie that criticized the Soviet system. She did one in 1988, and they managed to manipulate the narrative by saying that, in fact, it was pro-Soviet, so that was the sense of my question. And I also remember that when she did that movie, of course, as we saw, she was threatened by the Russian propaganda. So yeah, that was the sense of my question. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ivan, and I wanted to make a short comment and then ask a question stemming from that comment. a year ago, I did a series of biographic interviews with my grandpa, and I'm from Ukraine, from Donbas. And the topic of Holodomor, I mean, I tried to include it in the questions with my grandpa, who was 2 years old when Holodomor happened. And every time I asked him, he said, I don't remember. And I did believe that he really did not remember anything. The same answer I received every time I asked him about Stalin, what he thinks about Stalin now, many decades later. So we never talked about those things. And my question is about the phenomenon of Holodomor being a delayed, that Ukrainians only now are able to openly talk about it. And the discussions, the public discourse basically did not exist in the Soviet period. So the trauma was not processed for decades. So my question is basically to everyone. I don't have a specific question directed to one of you. What do you think about the fact that the trauma of Holodomor was not processed for a few decades? So what influence does it have on the current public discourse of Holodomor? Thank you.
If I may start this discussion, because, yeah, obviously I hope that other people would say something about it. I think that we can think about this process in relation to the concept of collective trauma. And I think that for a very long time, we have observed something like denial. And also, I think that you can start this work of working out trauma once this traumatic event is done, is finished. There is a closure. So then you can start working on it. And I think that it was necessary for this Soviet regime to collapse, just, to revive, to release this kind of memory. And now, I apologize, but I will make a comment on what was discussing yesterday. These very few representations of the COVID pandemics. And I think that this is basically because it's not finished yet. We just need to wait. So that's, and obviously, now with this war in Ukraine, right, we have something like this old wound, right, being opened again. Why is it so easy to get open? Because it has never been healed. It was just hidden slightly, a little bit. So that's what comes to my mind right now, but I think that you would probably add something more interesting.
If it's okay for me to answer, I'd like to contribute to that. What I would say is, again, those two figures, Jones and Durante, were the leading voices on this phenomenon, in particular, referencing the New York Times being distributed to 180 countries, even in the 1930s, but Durante's voice in the New York Times had a great impact on how this story was told to begin with. But now, following Maidan and decades of Soviet repression, Ukraine is coming from a position of defeat, but it's leadership in defeat. They have a very clear understanding of what Russia's intentions are, and just like other nations on the periphery of the Russian Federation, there's a very clear-eyed view of what colonialism from their eastern neighbor means. If you listen to leadership rhetoric, Zelensky or Kayakalis, they understand exactly what's coming from the Eastern neighbor, and they are more vocal about this. So these narratives are in online social networks. They're being shared in official speeches. And I think this sanctioning of dialogue, of discourse about the tragedy, as well as widespread Russian aggression and colonialism, it's being authorized, if you will. So there's this national foreclosing around experiences, what makes a Ukrainian identity, and this is part of it. It isn't a shameful, dark chapter anymore. It is expressing Ukrainian resilience, what they have already gone through in the past 100 years, and it contributes to this attitude of Ukraine will win. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. So understanding where they've come from and where they're going, as well as other post-Soviet nations, I think there is a real strength in recognizing what has happened in the past and foreclosing around the idea that this isn't going to happen again. And I think this is why these narratives are being shared. So in family archives or in interviewing the grandpa, as was mentioned, little snippets are coming out and allowing for a fuller tapestry, a fuller view of what occurred. The official record is quite narrow. Some of the photos that are shared today, I think we have all seen. Harvard, their repository of information has these photos and these maps, and it's quite narrow, but what online digital space has allowed is for little tidbits of memory or even a shared anecdote to start to be shared to open up the aperture on this event. But I do believe that as a society, global society, we are becoming more versed in speaking about trauma and having language around trauma and being able to share that publicly. But I would say that it contributes to a national identity of Ukraine as being strong resistors, heroes, and therefore going to prevail in the most current iteration of Russian aggression.
Any reflections?
Thank you very much. I would like to ask the first speaker and the second speaker, because in your presentations there were a monument of a small girl who should be connected with Holodomor, but you know, last, I don't know, 1 year, I think something like that, I see the pictures with the people who putting the flowers near the monument, but not because of commemorating the Holodomor, but commemorating the war, Ukrainian war. So I would like to ask you, what do you think? Because you know, it's the different. Sorry, it's a different, two different topics, yeah, no different things. But you know, and the people started thinking that it's the monument of the war in Ukrainian. So. What do you think about it? Maybe I'm wrong, but you know, it's my remark, and I see the connection between the two different events, two different topics. What do you think about connecting that kind of connections? Thank you.
Can I say?
Yes, sure. Professor Tatiana Perga.
in my presentation, it was not the monument, the picture of this monument. It was in the second presentation, but as I understand, you mean the monument to Holodomor located in Kiev, and this is the little girl, and you mean flowers to this girl. And on my opinion, no, I'm Ukrainian, of course, Holodomor was the artificial, how can I say, disaster made by Russia, by colonial, colonial imperial, the Soviet Union, and Russia was the core of this imperial. And there is, there are some parallels with the current war. War is also a great disaster, and it's also the Russia which manifested this colonial idea and colonial behavior. It started the full-scale war against Ukraine, and once more we see the result of this colonial policy. And that's why in Ukraine it is clear. It is the symbol of defense against Russia colonialism and the memory to victims. And that's why for Ukrainians it's clear. I don't know about the foreigners, maybe they don't know the history of Ukraine and don't understand this symbolism of this action.
May I? As you remember, Margaret Corporal presentation, the first part of our second day of conference, she used multi-directional memory conception and she used this conception to understand how the same place start to be places in dialogue with commemoration of some other events. We observed, as you say, and as Tatiana said, also we can observe this process right now in Ukraine, especially in Kiev, but not only in Kiev, because we have a lot of images from Kiev in news and social media. But in fact, in Ukraine, famine monuments and some other places of memory, for example, mass graves, are social and generative because they generative by invoking other cultures of memory. They collect new memories, and when you visit these places now, you can get the impression that it's a memorial site for the victims. For example, as you in your case, for both events, for Holodomor and current war. And they use the same rituals because they have Ukrainian war now haven't their special only for rituals characterized for this event. So they use rituals well known at Ukrainian society. So in social rituals, you can see that the center of gravity has shifted from the sacrifice made by the nation for the individual, sacrifice remembered as the martyrs, because it's the same kind of emotions for Ukrainians, as Tatiana said. And this place continues to accumulate new stories that reinforce its edification as the same kind of memory, because the same perpetrator, I think.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. No, it's okay. I do also have a question to all the people who have just been presenting. I really enjoyed this panel, so thanks a lot for the great contributions. You were just talking in the discussion about the sort of, you could say, trauma of silence, or a time when Holodomor memory could not sort of surface in relation to Ivan's story, right, about his grandfather. I was also wondering, if we think of the big Ukrainian diaspora, especially, for example, the one that I know best, which is in Canada, there were many activities already some decades ago, right? Way before, basically, you could say, in places like Ukraine itself, you have a sort of reintegration or a reactivation of that Holodomor memory. What do you think is the role that this sort of diasporic Holodomor memory may have had on how the memory was reconfigured, especially after the 1990s in Ukraine itself?
Any reflections on that comment?
I would like to say something very specific about Agnieszka Holland and Polish cultural production. And I suppose that this very difficult relationship between Ukrainians and Poles was also something contributing to silencing this subject. And I believe that it is exactly this transnational mode of production and her making this film outside of Polish cinema and Polish official culture that has prompted, right, her to deal with this very problematic and very troublesome relationship between these two nations. So I'm saying about something very particular, perhaps not that easily transferable to this very general level, but I think that these particularities are also very important for this issue.
Elisabetta, I think also the film premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. Am I mistaken about that? Mr. Jones, I mean.
Once again, sorry.
I think the film was also premiering for the first time in Toronto. Am I right? Or
Yeah, but this is, kind of a favorite festival for Agnieszka Holland. Yes, but you're right. So that's also, and with the green border, that is also very problematic, right? In terms of this migration crisis, its premiere also occurred in Venice at the film festival, right? So it wasn't shown in Poland. So I think that for analyzing this ideological work, we also need to take into account some of distribution and exhibition practices. What is shown and when and where, in what kind of circumstances and context. Yeah, so thank you. That was really wonderful point.
So
maybe I go back to this question about differences between diasporic and modern Ukrainian culture of Holodomor memory, especially after 1991, because it's a very interesting issue, and I probably think that I have an answer for not only a comment, but some reflection, maybe answer for this question, because we usually think about diasporic memory, about diasporic communities of memories as homogeneous linear continuity, but in fact in in diaspora, you have a lot of communities of memory, and during, for example, during Cold War, not all Ukrainian descendants or Ukrainians in America, or especially Ukrainians in Canada, not only Ukrainians in Canada, understand and identify Great Famine 1932-1933 as Holodomor and as a genocide, because this kind of memory, Holodomor is artificial memory, Holodomor is a genocide, was transmitted from diaspora to modern Ukraine in 1991 only in one more general version that was produced by some Ukrainian cycles only in 1980, but in fact in diaspora Holodomor memory has own huge tradition starting from 1948 from DP camps in American and British zones in Germany. For example, not for example, but definitely in two DP camps. The first one, I think about the Augsburg, Sommerkaserne DP camp, where on 1946 was re-established Association of Ukrainian YAS as a part of own YAS organization, and this 15th anniversary is the first example of instrumentalization of Holodomor, because they use the topic of Holodomor in 1984 in Munich, when they try to organize their future life before they will go to the places for their new settlement, for US and Canada, for Paraguay, for Argentina and other places. So the first project of Holodomor memory as a special fundamental event for Ukrainians was definitely in 1941. But when on 1953 in Ukrainian cycles in US, for example, Ukrainian Women League, in America, they start in 1953, organized some first mass demonstration, as they, some of them did in DP camps. So, but all of these people in 1953 try to organize new communities of memory in diaspora, and they have a lot of differences, political differences, because some of them are Greek Catholic believers, some of them Orthodox, and for much of them it was too hard to dialogue with each other, also in the topic about the Holodomor memory. But in 1980s, when they have some contacts with Ukrainian anti-communist movement in Ukraine, they produce some images, but it's not the same from the early stages of the Holodomor commemoration, when a lot of survivors was alive. But it's a new, very prosthetic image of the Holodomor. So in 1991, in Ukraine, they have some kind of diasporic memory only from the end of the Cold War, only from 1980s, from the 50th anniversary. Sorry, it's too lot from my side. Thank you.
So I would like to thank all the speakers, all the participants of this panel for their extremely interesting contributions. Although from slightly different perspectives, they all reveal the dilemmas, difficulties, and the importance of constructing, shaping, or maybe reactivating the memory of the Holodomor, remembering Holodomor, as well as reveal the multi-faced nature of that memory or the reasons for its absence. Yesterday we talked about some kind of model of remembrance, and maybe some of the events, some of the periods may remain forgotten, or more precisely not remembered because it could not or not always were codified in the key forms of memory that have developed or was developing in that time. But as we heard today during the keynote lecture and in presentations, attempts are really being made in the form of recorded memories, researches, films, arts, literature, monuments, and other forms of embodiment. Memory means confronting many trauma-related interventions of social actors from the past. Individuals and collective versions of the past are linked to the identity and the problems of who we were and who we are today. And in this respect, I may say that Holodomor plays an important role in the history and also in the politics of remembrance of contemporary Ukraine. It is it may be called one of the found myths of this history, especially in relation to the war that takes place there today. And to finish this panel, I would like to pose or just to leave some open questions for further considerations or maybe researches. What plays crucial role in the shaping memory of the Holodomor? Is there any remembrance patterns possible at all? And what should be paid special attention to in this process? Who should do this? Is any form of remembrance appropriate? And finally, in this particular case, what lessons should we learn from the past to ensure that this does not happen in the future? Thank you very much, and we have a few minutes, but also we have time to go for lunch and to continue our discussions with a couple of coffee, tea, etc.